Chicago Debates community. Welcome back to another demo debate put out by us. This time, you'll see some of our high school students participate in this demo debate. So please keep in mind that this demo debate will be done with high school time. And on the affirmative, we have a team from Lindblom High School. The 1A will be Courtney, and the 2A for this debate will be Aisha. And then on the negative, we have a team from Steuben, and the 1N will be Ian, and the 2N will be Marcel. In this debate, the affirmative will be debating the Defund the Police Act from the core files, and on the negative, they will be debating the Federalism DA, the Budgets DA, T, the state's counterplan, and then on-case arguments. So that's what you can expect in this debate, and enjoy it. The 1A can take it away.
All right, so basically to give everybody a roadmap, I'm going to be reading contingent on inherency and then moving on to my advantages, which are, just advantage. It's just called advantage. Then I'm going to be moving on to solvency, and then I'll be moving on to framing. Contention 1, inherency. Policing has expanded massively. The role of police is not neutral, but rather based on violent racial and social injustice. Defunding the police is a prerequisite to movement success. Vital and Donnella 20. The widespread protests across U.S. cities renewed discussions of what role police should play in society. Black people and poor people have long encountered that police pose more threat to safety than a boon. The country needs to reconsider fundamentally what is the police should be doing at all. They're basically being tasked with addressing every social problem that we have. Policing is now happening in our schools. It's happening in relation, to the problem of homelessness, untreated mental illness, youth violence, and some things that we historically associate police with. Policing has become more intensive, more invasive, and more aggressive. So what I'm calling for is a rethink on what we turned all these social problems over to the police to manage. Instead of actually addressing the fundamental problem, we have relabeled it as a problem of the fault of the distortedly people who we label as morally deficient. We keep imagining that we could turn police into social workers, that we can make them nice, friendly community workers. But police are violence workers. That's what really is at the root of policing. We don't want violence, but we should try to figure out how not to get police involved. We don't have any part of this country that has high-quality medical drug treatment on demand, but we have policing on demand everywhere. That we are using police to manage the problems that our very unequal system has produced. We are investing in this kind of austerity that the government can't afford to really do anything to lift people up. We have now put all our resources into subsidizing already the most successful parts of our economy, but those parts of the economy are producing this large group of people who are homeless, unemployed, and have untreated mental health and substance abuse problems. The mayor of Minneapolis tried to frame this as a problem of a few bad apples. He says, "Why are you protesting? We fired them." But this completely misunderstands the nature of our grievances. Plan: the United States federal government should cease federal funding to local law enforcement in any form, including ending the community police services program. Contention 2, advantage. American policing is a system of white lies about protecting white lives, property, and womanhood that leaves Black communities over-policed and under-resourced. Joseph 20. Panthers criticize America's justice system to a both-faced wire, one linked to economic exploitation and racial impoverishment in Black communities. America's criminal justice system is based on extraordinary and systemic lies, amplified by the metaphorical noose around the entire Black community. These white lies are sustained by the threat of anti-Black violence. Pro-policing arguments are built on racial cognitive bias. Smith 15. They are present to keep Black people, the Negro, in his place and to protect white business interests, and they don't have any other function. Only about 10% of the average police officer's time is devoted to criminal matters. The police are essentially bureaucrats with weapons, inserting the potential for violence where there is cause for none. We simply haven't tried. The police are only necessary because we are all too willing to hide behind the cowardice to actually put forth the effort to create a better world. Policing is structurally built on terrorizing Black communities through physical and psychological means. 1 in every 1,000 Black men will die at the hands of police officers. American policing has never been a neutral institution. 1 in 1,000 Black men can expect to be killed by police, and public health experts have described police violence as a public health issue. It can help in the decades of racially driven social control and oppression, as well as address social problems at their root instead of investing in an institution that further oppresses and terrorizes communities. Reform only reinvests to this violent system and moves policing to social alternatives that are empirically successful. Reform attempts have failed to curb police abuse. It isn't a few bad apples. The problem is policing itself. The task of building safety is not shared among building safety is shared among social workers, counselors, medical personnel, and psychologists. Abolishing the police does not mean firing all the police officers overnight, or that crime and violence should go unaddressed. Looking at crime and violence as symptoms of deeper issues, not with the baton and gavel, but with healthcare, education, and community. Constitution 3, solvency. Federal funding through programs like COPS incentives and sustains police violence, and the app is key to dismantle that system. CPD at al 20. The Justice Policing app is unacceptable. It says that it provides additional funds and legitimacy towards policing. The COPS program fully funds community-led public safety efforts. Policing received over $100 billion of public resources annually. The COPS office announced nearly $400 million in grant funding through COPS High-Risk Program. The COPS program has helped precipitate the policing crisis that we find ourselves in today. Federal funding for law enforcement has expanded the intensity and presence of police nationwide. Congress should immediately stop all funding to law enforcement to condemn, restrain, and use the power of the purse to remove federally funded police and military from our cities. Federal grants saddle local governments with extraneous police salaries, and they're set to expand. Sperry 20. Groups have begun calling on Congress to defund the police. COPS is essentially funding the streets of our communities in our country, so more and more police under the guise of what is supposed to be community-oriented. Congress must reinvest all those dollars and resources to end systemic racism, inequality, and disparities in Black and Brown communities. Congress must invest time in true health and the safety of our communities. Contention 4, framing. Reject traditional risk calculus based on implicit racial hierarchy in favor of recognizing Black and Brown people as the urgent body. That's key to hijack systems of racialized violence. OSIN 15. The body is increasingly set at odds with a larger scale and ethical concerns, especially large-scale and future events forecasted as suffering. Large-scale threats of future suffering can distort moral reasoning. It must be bypassed because there are bigger scales to worry about. Bodies that are currently suffering cannot be urgent because they are excluded from the potential collectivity. There could be suffering everywhere in some future time. As large-scale urgent concerns are institutionalized, the urgent body is increasingly obscured through technical planning and coordination. There's a built-in bias for action that circumvents contingencies. The urgencies of the body provide justification for its social exclusion of most marginalized. On a large scale, future emergencies effectively absorb the deliberate power and urgency of institutions of preparedness and risk avoidance. The assumed priority of the large-scale future emergency, the urgent body, becomes literally nonsense, a non-sequitur within societies and worlds that will always be more urgent. Waiting, like urgency, can undermine the possibility of self-care. Waiting can function as a potentially important spatial technology of the elite and powerful, mobilized not only for the purpose of governing individuals, but also retain claims over moral urgency. But there is a growing resistance to capture the claims of agency by the elite. Feminist theory insists that the urgent body, those who encounter violence, are usually framed as private, apolitical, and mundane. Insisting that a suffering body is now which it cannot wait, it has the ethical effect of drawing it into consideration alongside the public and exceptional scope of large-scale futures. Specifically, favor liberational politics over managerial debates about technical policymaking and munition that distract from oppressive systems. Singwangdao 15. Policymakers centering on the fact that on technical, managerial, and consensual administration remain within the realm of existing social relationships. Managerial approach to the government. Government is reconceived as a managerial function deprived of its proper political dimension. Open for cross.
Open for cross. Do you fiat the money that you take away from the police departments goes into social welfare?
Aisha, you want to answer that?
Go ahead, Courtney.
No, I don't fiat that.
All right. Where in your app does it state that not that money should go into social welfare, but after the plan, that money will go into social welfare? Like your evidence states that it's a good thing, but it doesn't state that it will happen. Where does it, like, can you point to me to a piece of evidence that calls out the system in which that will happen?
Are you asking me to provide you with the actual system of where,
well, like,
to provide you with an actual
what
to my
card
plan?
talks about how once money is removed from the police, it will go into these other systems? Since you don't fiat it.
It's basically, it's in my it's in my advantage cards. I don't remember. It's just one card. Do you want to ask me another question while I look for it?
We can move on. Your solvency specifically only highlights one grant, which is the COPS program. Do you only get rid of the COPS program?
No, we said that they should seize all federal funding. COPS is just one example.
Your plan text states how that your plan text is about local law enforcement. Does this exclude? What does the plan do about federal law enforcement?
We're talking about local police.
Yeah.
This isn't about federal officers.
Yeah, so federal law enforcement still exists post-plan?
Local law enforcement are the people that are making our lives more harder. Those are the people that are making Black lives and poorer lives harder in society. We're not talking about federal, we're just talking about
I'm just asking if these still exist post-plan.
So are you asking me if another police system is going to exist?
No, there's a difference between local law enforcement and federal law enforcement.
I'm aware.
Yeah. Do federal law enforcement still exist post-plan?
I believe that if I go back and look at my plan text again, I believe that it says law enforcement in general. It
specifically states local law enforcement.
I would have to look at my plan again, but
that's fine.
We're talking about local law enforcement, so that's what I think we should kind of focus on here. I feel like you're sort of trying to bring up a problem that isn't addressed in the plan, but okay.
Yeah. What does the plan do about future grants? Because it says it ends all grants now, but what happens if the DOJ wants to send more money?
The definition of what we mean in our plan, it means to seize. It means to stop all.
But what happens
funding,
to stop all
future
funding
funding
now?
will happen
in the future if they want to send more money?
Excuse me?
Like if you stop all money that's going there now, but then the DOJ wants to send more, that's fine. That's cross.
All right, quick roadmap. It's going to be 4 off and then case. All right, everyone's good? All right. On topicality, interpretation. Reform is making an improvement to make the criminal justice system more effective. That's Miller no date. Reform entails changing practices to make the system better. Abolishing entails dismantling a wholesale. 2 distinct philosophies, abolition and reform. Next, the B, violation. Police reform and police at a fundamental level. Literature bases pose different questions and have different assumptions. That's Mafka 2020. Police implosion and abolition do not subscribe to the idea that policing is somehow broken and need a reform. Instead, abolitionists proposes that a community order can be maintained without the government. Vote negative when their interpretation destroys negative ground. Abolition is the only good critique in CGR, and their interpretation allows for the affirmative to steal it. All of our arguments are based on the reform part of the resolution. There's no other limiting term. 2, only our interpretation solves predictability. Reform versus revolution is most predictable division ground. For the topic, this turns education. The education in the debate doesn't come from the other team lecturing you. It comes from the discussion that occurs within the round. If we win that, they make the discussion one-sided, and that's a reason that they can't solve any of their offense. Under the budgets, they said, A, uniqueness. States and local governments budget are on the brink now. Any new unplanned spending means cuts must be made. Those cuts would be education. Kennedy and Brickman 2020. Joint Budgeting Committee looking for cuts to state budgets. Today's school funding. 2 months after Colorado's first confirmed case of COVID-19, the state's government finances are rapidly spiraling towards the worst nightmare territory. Education and healthcare make up the largest parts of the state budget. Any stimulus money that state holds cannot be used to backfire the overall budget. Next, B, link. Ferguson proves that criminal justice system and police reforms are prohibitively expensive for jurisdictions. Federal government makes it even more expensive. That's B. Kempis 215. U.S. Department of Justice drafts proposals for police and court reforms when they bankrupt the city. The DOJ says Ferguson must focus on policing and court policies. The DOJ also called for better training and oversight. That monitors are a typical feature of the agreement between a police department and the DOJ that could run in excess of $1 million. Under the internal link, strong public school systems are necessary for democratic stability and viability. That's Dyson 17. Public schools are inextricably connected to the stability of our democracy. Democracies take work. They rely on the ongoing efforts of elected officials and citizens, and the pursuing skills that work required to it come naturally at most people. We'd have to educate children about the benefits and rationale while also equipping them with the skills and depositions. Democracy requires informed and active voters to seek information. Democracy is not about ending democracy is not just the end of public schooling, but also means that the way we achieve it. Next, under the impact, U.S. democracy is necessary and prevents large-scale war. That's Epstein et al. 2007. The democratic peace theory. Democracies create free markets and offer economic opportunity, which makes them more reliable trading partners and are far less likely to wage war on one another. Mature democracies do not fight wars with each other. Democracy promotion and long-term antidote to terrorism, inequality in police participation, lack of freedom of speech, and poor education all breed volatility. A democracy may be more likely to be viewed as the other countries a good trading partner, but outside of the investors, it makes a more stable environment for investment. Next, under the federalism data set. A uniqueness. Coronavirus responses ushered a new law of lasting wave of federalism and state innovation. That's Griswold 2020. The states are rising again. Governors are not the president of emergent heroes in the coronavirus pandemic. No other time in the past 100 years has Bernays called the individual states to launch novel social economic experiments without risk to the rest of the country. Their kind of strategic reverse. The states, even before the pandemic, began to discover what their police power was so robust. B. Link. State authority over criminal justice is a core area of federalism. Federal intrusion weakens the state authority across the board, which also damages state public health authority in the face of COVID-19. That's you and Dead Hard 20. The more difficult question is whether the circumstances require federal intervention is a constitutional matter. The primary responsibility of criminal justice enforcement lies within state governors. Restoring law and order to the city and streets, prosecuting offenders that fall within the police powers reserved to the state under the Constitution of the 10th Amendment. The 1996 Supreme Court case United States v. Lopez firmly rejected the idea of a general federal police power. Next, under the internal link, effective code response is necessary to prevent major economic decline. Hub 20. The current economic crisis calls to mindset of the Great Recession in 2008 in terms of widespread damage, and some draw comparisons to the Great Depression in the 1930s. What's really key is that it don't have any additional shocks at the top of the initial crisis. They have such a severe effect on our ability to work and produce. Government action ensures the capacity to contain the epidemic as quickly as possible to justify where we want to bring people back to work. Next, on to the impact. Economic decline leads to global war. That's Thomas in 2015. Interdependence raises the cost of conflict for all sides. The risk may increase. One of the independent countries governed by the internet. When we're looking at socioeconomic coalition, decisions for war and peace are taken by very few people. Many blame it on external dependence, contemplate the use of force to gain respect or credibility, adopt protectionist policies, and ultimately refuse to be deterred by new prospects are calamities. The greatest risk is that changes in the world's economy alter the circumstances and render this to interstate peace more precarious. If China and the United States fail to rebalance the financial relations, then trade war could result. Under the state CP text, the 50 states and the relevant territories should defund the police, refund money from the police to social, economic, and educational welfare programs, and make up leftover costs not covered under the police budget. Next, most criminal justice reform in the United States happens at the state level. State-based reforms solve best. As Lopez 16. The federal government is a tiny part of the U.S. criminal justice system. While the federal government can incentivize states to adopt policies, by and large, states will only embrace federal incentives and issues if they actually want to adopt the policies. Being almost all police work is done at the local and state level. Nearly 18,000 law enforcement agencies in America, only a dozen are federal agencies. The task of ending mass incarceration and reforming the police are going to fall wholly to the states. Under the case, the affirmative plan text does not fiat reinvestment into other programs. Don't let the affirmative gain any solvency or any reinvestment funds. Defunding the police fails. Restorative programs fail to cause increase in violence, illness, and disorder. Private policing and gang control fill in, which turned their advantage. That's Rufo 19. Abolishing police is not very practical. No matter how restorative, even the benevolent centralized state cannot extinguish the risks of violence and disorder. Civilization cannot be rolled back without dire consequences. In the vacuum of power, wealthy neighborhoods would deploy private police forces, and poor neighborhoods would organize around gangs, deepening structural inequalities. Next, the planned sudden funding of the police is jumping the gun. Funding needs to increase in the short term and retrain current forces and investments and alternatives. The plan ruins momentum and destroys any effective reforms. It's Norman 20. Community policing approaches are possible only via increased resources. Cadman reported increasing in size. The Cadman example is success story of dismantling the police. The key was rebuilding, not disbanding. Next, police culture is changing due to the accountability mechanisms which will decrease racial violence, but alternative programs come with delayed response times and are not equipped to handle emergencies. The plan lacks a police capacity, which causes an increased fear in crime, minority communities which are defenseless, which turn the app. That's Helga 20. The police culture is changing. Starting over is not the realistic implementation of guardian policing, oversight, crisis intervention, community policing, collaborative partnerships, and mental health service, social service agents, women and minorities, and law enforcement. We need the police, first responders, public safety, and crime. The crime will not end if we defund the police. There will be a delayed response when people are in need. Most affected people will be poor and the marginalized. Next, the plan can't solve larger inequality. That's Sudden 20. There needs to be reform to get rid of the police department. We would not respond to the calls for violence, calls for service for violence and domestic abuse. Defunding the police department won't address underlying problems. All of America's institutions have the same problem the police department has. Next, on to framing. Utilitarian and consequentialist first. Probabilities indefinitely regressive. That's Marseille 16. Human actions should be judged on right or wrong depending on the happiness and the greatest number of people. Utility. If an action produces more happiness than unhappiness, positive utility results. Utilitarians do not place their own happiness above all others. The ends justify the means. Any of our minuscule choices may alter human history, but we are only responsible for the consequences reasonably anticipate. We anticipate the consequences as best we can proceed to act accordingly. The fact that we can never be certain of the consequences does not undermine utilitarianism. Next, probability first framing is rooted in psychological biases and leads to mass death. Make them answer ideas before concluding. Cognitive biases. Go F. Clark. Disasters are unusual. Social sciences are bias towards phenomena that are frequent. Probability itself is narrow. The irony is probabilistic thinking has its own biases and lead to conceptual neglect of extreme events. We need new conceptual tools because of a trend towards severity of disorder. Demographic pressures are widespread. We will continue to be poorly prepared to deal with the disaster. We need to identify the barriers in effective thinking about disasters. One of the barriers is probability theory. As complement to the probabilistic thinking, I propose that we need a possibilistic thinking, which can be smarter about responding. And that's time.
Okay, so your counterplan clearly states that you want to defund the police on certain contingencies, but the plan literally states, defunding the police fails, restoration programs fail, causing the increase of violence. So I'm not really getting on how your counterplan actually helps your case, or your case helps your counterplan.
I mean, you're getting at a performative contradiction, but we're saying it's just a test of competition. What we're trying to do with the state CP is see if there's a better way to solve the entirety of the advantages. It doesn't mean that we link into the disadvantages. It just means that we're trying to propose a different solution towards your plan, which avoids some of the disads that we have stated in our 1NC.
There are also different worlds. If you can see that defunding doesn't solve, then there goes your F.
Okay. So basically, your whole federalism DA, most of it was about education and how we need money for education. How would that tie in with what we're talking about defunding the police here?
And the federalism dissent, well, what we're saying with that is, you're thinking about the budgets DA. The budgets DA is about the state funding for students, and the federalism dissent is about how a coronavirus response and past week in our coronavirus response.
Okay. So you agree that reforms work and that, they should work, and that we'll live in a society where police are becoming more sensitized to people, so therefore we shouldn't do anything about it, because according to the way that you frame.
Not that we shouldn't do anything about it, it's just that there's possible disadvantages to doing it, and that we propose to it is able to avoid these disadvantages as best as possible.
Okay, so going back to the way that you frame, so basically you're saying here that we need to focus on, people, situations that we can solve now, but we're not going to solve the people that could potentially die when we foster this system.
Wait, for the framing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for the framing, what we're trying to do is we're trying to do a probabilistic mindset where we're trying to not reject large scale impacts because it can affect the most amount of people. Affect the people that we are trying to prevent violence towards in the first place. So it means that
even though that impact that probably will never happen, and the people that are actually dying and people that are already socially dead in the society that we live in, that doesn't matter over impacts that more than likely won't happen.
It's the idea that the possibility of that impact means that we can't reject it.
Okay, so
you have a cognitive bias to reject that impact.
Your impact isn't happening now.
Our impact is possible in the future. We do our uniqueness
but
and our link and our
happening.
internal plans. Yeah, it's not happening now. That's the whole point. But once the plan is passed.
So I'm just going to go on case with solvency, anti-blackness, and social death impact, framing with nuclear war, answers to police prevent crime. Let's see. Answers to dangerous few, answers to deterrence. And then I'm going on to your topicality, answering topicality, then I'm going on to your CP, and then going on to federalism DA, and then budgets DA. To waste solvency, alternative programs. The plan eliminates problematic funds and redirected them to alternate programs. ACLU 20. Federal lawmakers make to meaningful actions at the end of racist policing systems in our country. Federal funding is used to militarize police, but police in schools advantages the failed drug wars and criminalize poverty and substance use. And that makes police at war with their communities. Hiring police for streets and schools and other federal grants that currently fund our failed criminal legal system. Federal resources that continue to perpetrate police violence and harm against Black and Brown communities must end. Next. 2AC, anti-blackness social death impact. Anti-blackness results in the social and ontological death, overweights all the other impacts. Wilson 10, wherever you find them, we are always dead. Black folks are dead, killed by their own faith only by being involved in the spread of power. The slavery and historical events long ended rather than ongoing paradigm of Black non-existence. Third world can fight against dominance and to colonize people land for people are narrative and repair where slaves can only fight against slavery. Blackness is constituted by violence and oncological first instance. This is the essence of Black being for the captor, the very atheist and cultural oppressions of performative agencies. Next, 2AC framing answers to the nuclear war. The world is already ended for people of color. Nuclear war is an ongoing reality for non-white bodies. Amalad 84, in terms of power, institutional racism, and imperialist military terror, for people of color, the world is over. Starvation is already a common problem. For people of color, the world as we know it has ended centuries ago. Our world is in our own language, customs, and ways have ended. More willingly in the demonstrate survival and any cost of then struggle, acts of war, nuclear holocaust, and genocide have already been declared out on our jobs, housing, schools, and families in our land. 2AC answers to police prevent crimes. So, policing is largely ineffective, but non-police measures resolve potential conflicts. Valid 20. What have we now is far from perfect. People get killed all the time, even in our societies. We are trying to address what's driving problematic behavior. Without police, there are drastically scaled back Black police forms. How does the picture change from people communities who don't use police and who don't trust them? Domestic violence goes grossly unreported. We won't have the resources that they can weaponize against other people. Defunding police shifts police away from perpetual tasks and integrates non-criminal measures. Mural 20, the phrase refers not to eliminating police departments altogether. Resources and non-police programs and policies advocate they are better equipped to address racial and social inequalities. There's no evidence that police leads to less crime. The problem is that it is actually a medical or educational concern, systematic violence and subjugation that is taking place in the country for founding and infiltrating systems justice and criminalized communities of color. 2AC answers to dangerous view. The theoretic dangerous view refines racist troops and structural violence. Abolished journal in 2017 calls for salvation nonviolent drug offenders, deservants, and dangerous to others codes on carry both racialized and classified meaning of African Americans are convicted violence offenders at higher rates. 2AC answers to deterrence. No deterrence effects versus too complex internal pressures, committed crime, overwhelmed fears of policing. Breaker 16. The real people don't offend people that kind of carefully deliberations. Accepting anyone to have the accurate grasp of this conflicts matrix is a risk of consequence in its perpetual state. Okay, moving on to topicality. Topicality, 2AC topicality friendly. We meet the act doesn't abolish the police, it defunds them. Even if the act results in abolition, the plain text is a vacuum topic. We meet the thesis of the act is abolishing police. It is the only way to improve the system and criminal justice overall. We meet and it's predictable. Abolish the discourse and now part of the criminal justice system reform. Keller 19. Movement of constant abolishment who says the system of inherently racism based on the retribution should be pulled by the roots. Abolish is become a radically cry for progressive wing in the justice reform movement. Next, counter-interpretation reform means to put an end to Merriam-Webster dictionary, to put an end to an evil by enforcing the intruding a better method of a course of action. For our interpretation, precise definition of reform grounded and its current operational meaning by crucial meaning debate about justice system. Be predictable limit. Their evidence concedes that the policing is complex and can include many different things. Only our interpretation poses a limit on what reforms and activities can include. Education, defunding police is core to the policing. There is an abundance of literature for both sides due to the use of multiple states equipping debaters with real-world knowledge about criminal justice systems overweights and arbitrary limits the argument. Literature checks limits and grounds loss. Affirmative has to choose a solvency advocate based on the topic of literature. Reasonability. The affirmative only must be reasonable close to the topic to allow for educational debate. If we are close to the topic, it is not a reason to reject the affirmative. Okay. Counterplan. 2AC states CP frontline permutation. Do both the plan and the counterplan. Only federal action can solve for the policing and federal level of funding associated with the states, and also key to ensuring enduring comprehensive guidelines for follow-on at local levels. Boheme 20. Not to hand over powerful and federal agencies that will be more difficult to hold accountable for local department spending. That spending has risen much faster than states' local police spending in recent decades. Okay, next, solvency deficiency does not solve the affirmative. The federal government funds local police means that the counter plan is functionally circumventive. Naylor 2020. Activists protesting police brutality is calling for cities and states to defund their police. Funding for local law enforcement has now increasingly come to the federal government. Federal department ranging on the departments of the justice system and departments of agriculture have granted programs aimed for hiring more police, equipping them and constructing new police families. Overseas, the COPS program says that they will provide $14 billion since the inserted to hire trained local law involved in community policing. Theory, 50 states fiat kills fairness and education. Uniform action does not have a solvency advocate, which is vital to engagement. Object fiat destroys all literature based on solvency deficiency and debate of how the Fed influences state behavior so the AF doesn't learn and we can't win. Voting issue to force research without distorting literature and topic focus. Okay. Federalism, DA. To non-unique, the policies of Trump presidency means the federalism is dead. It is about power and the basis state political redirection, not independent. Galthor 2020. Trump insisted that spend months denying the problem that even exists and saying that there is no responsibility for fighting the virus, even if the government's top infectious diseases experts pleading nationwide lockdown. Okay, no link. Trump executive order already encourages on state rights over policing. Kelly and Naylor 2020. Immediately clear without partial effects that might be given. Questions about Trump overpowering is what mostly states, local authorities, and law enforcement are shortcomings of the history of attempt to ban neck restraints. Next, 2AC budget DA frontline. No link. Defunding police. The police frees up the funding for educational spending. Good kind 2020. Those who call for police defunding says that they would rather have some duties handled by nonviolence specialties trained by social workers, education, or drug counseling as the police takes over no more work. Their budget has grown substantially. Policing typically accounts for 1/3 to 60% of American cities' annual budget. The city proposed cutting the NYPD budget by 0.3% and its finest year, 2021. The city's proposed education budgeting is 5 times large as the police budgeting, but the major purpose cutting 27 times more for education.
So first off, on your framing, would Black people die in a nuclear war?
Everybody would die in a nuclear war.
If everyone would die in a nuclear war, shouldn't we try and prevent nuclear war first?
Say it again, you cut out.
If everyone would die in a nuclear war, then why shouldn't we prevent nuclear war first?
That's what I'm literally saying in my literal case. I'm saying that we should defund police to deter nuclear war. What you're saying is that we should focus on...
Where's the impact? Where's the impact of nuclear war in
my case?
And also, Black bodies are being thrown away and social death is happening right now. Wouldn't you want to solve a problem that's actively happening?
Yeah, Marcel, go ahead.
Okay, so I said 2AC framing answers to nuclear war.
Wait,
the world has... Okay.
Sorry. Did you? So you in the last answer you just gave, you claim to have an internal link to stopping nuclear war.
No, he asked for my impact of nuclear war. I'm just stating what I read in my case about nuclear war.
Okay, so you don't stop nuclear war from happening.
We deter it from happening because we're focusing on Black bodies and social inequality and violence from the police.
So the affirmative actively attempts to deter nuclear war?
Yes, it did.
All right.
Yeah.
What theoretical arguments did you make on the state? Make a permanent fiat?
On your CP?
Yeah. Did you only make like 2 theoretical arguments?
I said permutation, do both the plan and the counter plan.
And then what was the other one? Just fiat?
50 states fiat kills fairness in education.
What's the impact of 50 states fiat?
It's my theory.
What's the impact? What's the impact of 50 states fiat? I didn't get it.
What do you mean? What's my impacts of 50 states fiat?
What's theoretical rejection of the team because of the 50 states argument? Like, do you have any reason to vote down the team?
You keep on cutting out. I'm sorry. I really can't hear you.
Do you have any reason to vote down the team because we ran the 50 states?
because you kill our fairness and education in the entire debate, which means we actually learn nothing from this debate if we do not have fairness.
So it's just education, okay.
And fairness.
Let's see. So, if like post plan, would the police be left with like money or like enough money to be operational?
No, because the ultimate goal is to abolish the police.
All right, thank you. If we prove war causes more structural violence, then do we win the?
And I didn't finish my answer. I'm so sorry. I blanked out for a second. We're not saying that the police, we're just going to shut it down. Everybody's not going to have a job. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that we can turn it into alternative programs. And that will effectively leave the police not being able to be used.
The order for the speech is going to be the state's counterplan, then case, and then frame. First of all, on the state's counterplan, the first argument to make is a perm to both argument. First of all, this links to the net benefit of federalism. If the federal government tries to override a state's decision with a decision of their own, it will absolutely crash federalism because it looks like the federal government is trying to take credit. Secondly, this is physically impossible. If the states and the federal government try to do the same thing at the same time, it causes tons of issues with the implementation, which ruptures solvency. And three, the federal government doesn't have the power over local jurisdictions even to enforce federal law. Federal involvement means worse decisions and that ignore communities and are symbolically gestures at best. That's Barclay 11. There are important differences between the state and federal government in terms of local actors. State legislators have greater control over authorities in Congress. Congress and Congress cannot insist that local prosecutors enforce federal laws. Federal prosecutors focus on cases they bring. Prosecutors do not concern themselves with the community. They do not have an obligation to fix local problems. Because of the state AGs are going to be held responsible, they have an incentive to fix any problems on the ground, unlike federal prosecutors. And secondly, they make this argument that federalism fails. First of all, the nailer card they read is about federal grants going to the government, going to state locals. However, not the budgets themselves. The federal budget is what's the money going to the police departments. They do not. The states get to decide how that money is spent. The grants vastly are a minority of state funds. State funds. They specifically named the COPS grant, which is a DOJ grant, which is one specific DOJ grant. This doesn't outweigh the amount of money that the states give to the local law enforcement. Also, the 1NC Lopez evidence specifically indicates that states have the vast majority, have almost impervious control over their departments, which means that they control the funding to their departments, not the federal government. The federal government cannot force the states to spend less on their federal government, on their specific local governments. The third argument they read is this Boehm card. However, Boehm is really bad. It's specifically talking about it talks about federal law enforcement, which they specifically leave alone in their plain text. They don't affect federal governments, which if you read the Boehm card is one of the things about. But secondly, this card is about grants again, which I just answered above with the nailer card. Both the cards are about grants. And third, they argue that that the federal government is critical to follow on because it's an overarching method which forces the states to do things. However, first of all, the Lopez evidence from the Wednesday specifically indicates that the states are the ones that have control over their local governments, and there's momentum at the state level for reform. Now, localities are key to successful defunding. Take 20. Major U.S. cities across the U.S. are taking the lead on what they imagine the police force will be like. The mayors are showing willingness to initiate budget cuts. Blasio, Garcetti, for police funding is most allocated to the state and local officials. Also, the case itself does not fiat money going back to these social programs. However, the counterplan does, which means we solve for these social programs way better than the affirmative, since we have an insured mechanism. In cross-text, they could not name a mechanism of which this money would go back to these communities, but only the counterplan is a specific method in which that money would be returned. And onto the 50-state fiat bad stuff.
interpretation of negative gets domestic agent counterplans one functional limit to prevent small affirmatives with no federal government keyword. Focus the debate on largest affirmatives with literature-based agent distinctions. Don't conflate solvency and legitimacy. If the key counterplan seems perfect, it means they choose a bad affirmative. 2, predictability. The states are usually in charge of CGR, which means the counterplan is well reflected in the topic nature. 3, negative ground outweighs. The topic is huge and limitless affirmatives. There are no core disads. The problem is magnified if the neg loses the only topic guaranteed generic. 4, reciprocity. The affirmative fiats multiple actors with the federal government too. And reject the 5, reject the argument, knock the team. 6, negative flexibility. State and local actors are heated negative flexibility. We must test the desirability of the affirmative from every angle, especially the actor. The counterpoint solves the entirety of the case by limiting the action to the state governments themselves. We have complete control over the funding of these local law enforcement agencies, which does exactly what the affirmative does, but better, because the states are the ones in control, not the federal government, which Lopez has indicated is critical. On to the case. First of all, first, they make this. They make this argument that federal funding goes to the police. However, we've already answered this, that first of all, the states are the ones in control of the federal funding. Secondly, the 1 and C cards specifically indicate that absent the police, third-party actors will take over. This means that rich white neighborhoods will just have private security guards. The other neighborhoods could resort to militias or just groups of communities with armed individuals, which are specifically worse than the police, because they have zero accountability from the government, They don't answer to anyone, and they would just cause more violence. And the police are necessary to respond to emergency calls and violent crime. Nobody else is equipped with the necessary training. Their evidence only focus on the worst possible officers, which is too narrow. That's KC20. CDC deployed social workers with mental health professionals along with the police. Disband the police and nobody responds. Social workers and mental health professionals did not sign up for careers that include the staff dispatch in dangerous situations. Videos and anecdotes reports of police officers behaving badly. The truth about emblematic of over 700,000 officers is more than 12,000 local police departments. No community in the country could go 24 hours without the police, and defunding is not enough. Alternative emergency response programs are unviable without an increase in funding. The plan leaves Black communities with inadequate resources to guarantee their safety. That's 11-20. Justice for police departments cannot provide the resources necessary for guaranteeing the safety merely by reallocating existing public funds. We will do so will require massively increasing the overall public spending on these communities. If you fund the police, we must fund the social state, and also they don't fiat money going into these communities. They also have no mechanism labeled for how they would do this in the 1AC, meaning they don't access the solvency that would come from funding these social programs. Don't let them gain something super extra topical. And onto the new social death stuff. First of all, the 2AC screwed up reading a Wilderson card for their social death impact. Wilderson concedes that social death and anti-blackness are ontological, which means that they are things that will infinitely perpetually exist as long as the world exists. As long as the metaphysical world exists. The affirmative does nothing to try and fix that state of the world. They conceded that their impacts are basically omnipresent. There's no way they could solve for social death. If you want to, you could read the Wilderson card that specifically talks about ontological death outweighs other impacts. However, this is only in context of an internal link chain that solves for an ontological death impact. Government action cannot solve for an ontological death impact. That's Wilderson himself. Onto the framing page. First of all, prefer utilitarianism. Consequences of the best way to measure things. First of all, government, only for realistic government action, we must prioritize the number of lives saved, and for utilitarianism, the only ethical rubric is to maximize the number of lives saved. That's green 10. Maybe misleading, but it defines the deontology in terms of value, not distinctly deontological for correct reasons. And a career rational critic can share the counting on every person's well-being. Decision-making practice gives equal weight to everyone's interest, and the ones the evidence specifically indicates that absent focus on consequences, we will turn to mental biases, because human beings prefer the smaller, timely impacts rather than the big ones, which will cause us to kill someone.
Sure. Okay, so you mentioned that my 2IC anti-Black violence social death impact is an ontological problem, and so we can't even solve for it. So you agree that this is a problem that's going on in the world, and you're doing nothing to stop it?
Well, the ontology is the argument that anti-Blackness itself is a structure that cannot be removed via government action. That is Wilderson's argument. You read Wilderson's argument. We conceded it. The affirmative doesn't solve for it.
Okay, so basically your framing is saying that you should prioritize problems that are happening right now. So, and your partner literally said we should prioritize problems that are happening right now. So do you agree that this problem is happening right now, that anti-Black violence and social death is happening right now?
Even if it is happening right now, that is not.
I'm just
that is
asking for a
completely
yes or no
irrelevant.
question. Is it happening right now in society today?
Sure, but you don't solve for it. There is,
Okay.
you read an argument that states that it is basically omnipresent and that government actually can't do anything about it. You read Wilderson, that is Wilderson's argument.
Courtney, you have any questions?
Okay, so moving on to well, not moving on, so I'll stay on anti-Blackness. So do you agree that anti-Blackness outweighs any other impacts, correct?
No.
So I'm sorry, I have to go back.
The argument I made is that you conceded that you don't solve for it. I never said it outweighs.
Okay.
I did more work on the framing page about utilitarianism being consequentialism being better.
Ontological death outweighs all under impact. Okay. So moving on to your Levitt's card, it says that we don't guarantee safety once policing will be abolished. But why doesn't addressing deeper issues within communities work?
Sure.
Without using theory in mind, like providing me actual cold hard evidence, why doesn't addressing issues of poverty, substance abuse, all that, why doesn't it work?
Sure. One, we never made the argument that doesn't work. We made two arguments here. We said that with absent police, specifically public safety concerns, which are something that social community help, probably that social community help doesn't necessarily directly solve for, would go unchecked without the police. And secondly, you don't solve for those things. We've made it clear there is no internal link for your solvency into helping community social programs. So even if you win, that is a viable method of solvency. The counterplan does it better because we fiat that, and you have no internal link to doing so.
Okay, so moving on. So your federalism argument is that that the government has no real power within this. Well, no. Was that the counterplan?
It was the state's counterplan. Yeah. The state's counterplan. The argument on the state's counterplan is that states have jurisdiction over their own police departments, not the federal government.
Okay, so when was enforcing laws about funding? We're basically saying that the government funds these programs, but they don't enforce them, and they just are inadvertently responsible for it. So you think that that's not true?
We read evidence. The Lopez card is very good about how the states control the flow of money, so the states can easily deny it themselves. Even if the federal government sends the money, the states can not spend it on police. And cross over, by the way.
I'll start. So just a quick roadmap. It's just going to be the federalism dissad, and then a quick touch on the cross-ex, and that's it. First, on the uniqueness debate, extend Gersel 20 means that COVID has uniquely revived state federalism to empower states more now than in the past 100 years. They provide no counter-argument, which means that we hold a unique time of endowed powers to states. Coronavirus sponsors revive federalism and empowered states. It's Cassidy 20. After Donald Trump was elected, a revival of federalism didn't feature prominently. The governors of California, Oregon, and Washington announced at a Western States Pact the president has no formal legal authority to categorically override their state shelter-in-place orders. Next, onto the link debate. Extend U20. Quarantines the power of the states due to control over policing. If the plan is passed and they turn the policing power over to the federal government, they provide no counter argument showing that the plan is guaranteed to link and destroy federalism. This argument holds 100% weight. Also, a quick impact to this: if the federal government does have control over pandemic response, it will inevitably kill more Black people. Currently, the highest amount of deaths due to percentage in the community is 20% of COVID deaths are Black Americans, even though they only make up 13% of the population. This shows that if the federal government does have response, is able to have COVID response, then they will inevitably allow more Black Americans to die than anything that the current squad would allow. Next, under the police policy. Police policy is an important state power. Federal criminal justice reform imposes big mistakes in the whole country. That's Edwards 2020. Federal aid is a small share of the total state local police funding, but a tail that wags the dog in terms of federal control. One of the problems with federal politicians making big mistakes and impose those big mistakes in the entire country. The 1994 crime bill was imposed on the country by a Democratic president in a Democratic Congress, but is now viewed as a big mistake by by Democrats. Next, criminal justice, especially police policy, is an issue left to the states. The Chavez 11, the local primary of criminal justice issues cause well established. The Supreme Court has also clearly articulated the suppression of violent crime and vindication of its victims are undeniably local issues that are left to the states. Criminal justice reform is a state issue. That's lesser 18. Criminal justice reform has the attention of the country, but the state and local officials are responsible for 90% of the prison population. States and are the traditional laboratories for democracy. Next, states' control over criminal justice policy is the bedrock promise of federalism system. That's Barcode 2005. The federal system of the United States is based on a bedrock promise that states bear the primary responsibility for criminal justice policy. It has long been recognized that criminal justice is at the core of states, not national responsibility. These trends are problematic, and is wise and important for Congress to pay close attention to federalism values when considering sentencing policy. It is important for Congress to remember that the states have been much to teach about the federal government about sentencing policy. Next, on to the internal link debate. Federalism is key to COVID response. Preserving state authorities necessary for public health systems. That's Galva et al. 2005. The erosion of state authorities diluted states' capacity to create and implement innovative local solutions. Reconstruction of public health infrastructure should be undertaken as a critical review of primary public health roles in the states. Next, state flexibility and real-time response is necessary for effective COVID response. That's LeBlanc 20. The state is needed flexibility to consider a variety of factors when considering the re-engaging parties in the economy. The context of the data is important. There's no special formula that will tell us how and when to reopen. The states need to remain nimble and be prepared to pull back in some areas where restrictions are lifted when there's need to do so. Next, strong federalism is necessary for successful coronavirus responses. The states are too diverse and effective for a single national approach. That's Jenkinson 20. Suddenly the near forgotten 10th Amendment is relevant again. To protect themselves from the national government is mostly getting in their way as they try to cope with the crisis. Given how vast and varied and unevenly populated this in the United States, makes it the state's sovereignty to prevail at any coronavirus policy decision. Extend Hub 20, which means that economic decline is guaranteed if the plan is passed. State police powers is key to effective quarantining. If new COVID flu comes out, in the winter, it could cause massive reemergence and be 4 times as deadly. Guaranteeing economic decline and a longer shutdown. An effective police response now means that it would guarantee the reemergence. Effective COVID response is necessary for the economy. That's Magnuson 20. Panelists were largely in agreement that lifting the lockdown too early creates its own economic hazard. The flattening the curve in COVID-19 was taking epi models of face value, and there's a large welfare and economic benefit to social distancing, slowing the spread of COVID-19. Optimal strategy involves multiple waves in contact reduction. Next, the best way to protect the economy is through controlling the coronavirus. That's Juan et al. 20. Even if the hypothetical world and economy is valued above human life, economics would say that wouldn't necessarily make it safe. The best way to get control of the economy is through the quickly as possible, said Edward Kaplan, who teaches economic policy and public health at Yale University. Next, on to the impact. War turns. War turns structural violence. War is separated from issues associated with social justice. It's not a product of set injustices, but it's an impact magnifier. 2, racism isn't the cause of war. War isn't being fought over the productions of racial in our system. Instead, war is a magnifier of said issue. From FDR's executive order in 9066 that spread racism towards Japanese Americans to Bush war on terror, wars have only magnified structural conditions that hurt people of color. 3, this means that even if they win their framing, solving war is prerequisite to any social movement, and without it, a war will continue to be an occurrence. And because of said occurrence, structural violence will continue to exist. For psychologically constructing others as an enemy construes your ethical understanding of said group, meaning that even if you reject the idea that war can cause structural violence, the nature of creating an enemy itself requires an ethical disregard of their existence. It means that you have a moral obligation to prevent war. 5, this means that we act since their framing. Extend Tonneson 15. They provide no counter arguments to the impact. It means that the impact has 100% probability magnitude. Nuclear war from economic decline is guaranteed to everyone. And cross state even admitted nuclear war would kill Black Americans. It means that we must prioritize preventing nuclear war first.
So, budgets, federalism, counterplan. Well, no, budgets, federalism, T, counterplan. Okay. Judge, you should be voting F if you want systematic change to happen and Black bodies to no longer be exterminated. One of our budgets, DA, unique and substantious. The federal government is sending aids to states now that will ease the ideas of revenue and force budget cuts. McGahee 2020. $1 trillion in federal assistance to state and local governments is necessary. Without it, we will take a severe and most terminally unnecessary essential public services hit to the economy. But perhaps the most crucially for the economy, the HEROES Act would send over $100 trillion to state and local governments. It could not come too soon from state and localities. Without new federal aid, the revenue loss, will lead to devastating job cuts, hurting the economy in 2 ways. And this turns their economic impact as well, because it's also saying that even if we do not rely on the federal government anymore, that's still going to hurt the economy, and that still leads to their to their impact of nuclear war, and basically saying that a bad economy leads to global war, and that's just what they're trying to do. And defunding the police allows for reallocation for school funding. Holder 2020. As the role of pervasive power of police has been questioned, so too have the bloated budgets, even as crime is falling across the country. With the money saved, and cities will reallocate resources towards other public service, like schools. They're basically saying in their whole budgets DA, basically saying that, oh, we need to have the schools, but basically, if we're putting that money back into the community, that includes schools. It's not just saying, oh, we're putting it back in for just health concerns. We're putting it back in for the schools as well. And federal funding solves extension. The Great Recession proves that federal funding means smaller impact. Evans et al. 2014. The Great Recession led to the largest expansion of federal support for public education through ARPA. The federal government doubled their share of district revenues. Okay, moving on to federalism. Trump is weakening federalism by now threatening to withhold funds from mail-in voting. So in 2020, President Trump has threatened to withhold federal grants from the state of Michigan and Nevada if they proceed to withhold funds for mail-in voting. President Trump has threatened to withhold federal grants from the states of Michigan and Nevada if they receive plans to vote by mail-in voters. If the president can get around such restrictions and imposes no conditions on federal grants to state governments, he can use that power to bully states into a wide range of issues. We're basically saying that they're trying to downplay the role that the federal government does have in our local states, and that's just wrong, and you're ignoring an enormous power, and that can lead to even more problems. Moving on to counterplan. The problem solves best. Federal reform is vital because funding drives over policing and over incarceration. 48-2014. One aspect of this plan, the federal government is encouraging over-policing through the money it sends to the state and law enforcement. For decades, the federal government has provided equipment for the police worth of billions of dollars. Federal programs that have provided assistance to them give better coordination, oversight, and community engagement. $4 million the federal government sends to law enforcement annually, with longer no-cure goals about how the resources should be used. We're basically saying that the money that they're getting sent, they are using to put more police into these communities. They're not just... It's not just saying that, you know, a lot of these grants and what have you, they are being put into these policing programs. You can see in the evidence that this amount of money, that we're putting into these policing programs have been shown to be way more expansive than they have recently been, and these are becoming after these grants. So you can clearly see that it's actually happening, and it's not just, oh, they can use the money for something else. No, they're actually using this money towards that. Then I'm going to move on to T. We meet extensions. Policing introduces a holistic approach that includes the community efforts as predictable and in line with literature. The app is the core of the topic and is the only holistic approach. And we're basically saying that the app works and that we do meet their extensions, and they're basically just saying that just so they can have something to say. And going back on case, they say choosing probability is wrong, but we should also say that we need to focus on Black bodies being constantly thrown away. They don't solve for anti-Blackness either. They're basically just saying that we don't solve for it because we're not doing stuff to change people's minds, but we're actually trying to systematically change the systems that were formed in anti-Blackness. They're doing nothing, so therefore that doesn't work. And we're also going to say that they're basically just trying to solve problems that don't need to be solved. They're trying to fix an economy that, you know, there's actual... Can I finish my sentence? That there's actual plans being made towards that, but there's no plans being made toward abolishing the police.
All right. Order is going to be the budget's the counterplan, or the state's counterplan, the federalism case, and then framing. First on the budget we'll concede there's no link. They don't affect. We can see the non-unique evidence they read in the evidence they extended in the 1AR, and also their link turn is dependent on them being able to refund money, which I'll get more on the case page, but they have conceded that they don't do this. Also, all we have to do is win either A, they have no risk of actually refunding any money, or the counterplan does it better to win over access to their link turn. There is no offense on this flow. We're not going for the budget. On to the counterplan. The counterplan completely solves the entirety of the case. First of all, it defunds the police at the state level, which the Lopez evidence specifically indicates is where the control of these local enforcement is at. And also, not only does it do that, it fiats a refunding of that money to social programs, which is something the affirmative doesn't do, which means the access all of their solvency about putting money back into the marginalized communities. And we also make up excess. The third plank of the counterplan makes up excess costs that would not be covered under the refunding of the police budgets, which solves for the Levitt's solvency deficit, which we'll get onto later, which they had conceded. First of all, the only real argument they extended here is that the federal government is the most important because of grants and equipment. First of all, total budgets outweigh equipment and working grants. Grants don't matter. Equipment grants. First of all, the states are the ones spending the money in the first place, so the states can control where that money is spent. The Hagen evidence that when conceded in the 1AR specifically states that states control the money to their own police departments. Also, and even if they win, the grants matter. Grants are big. It doesn't matter because they conceded that states are the ones that control where the grant money goes. The counterplan solvency allows the states to just redirect that money towards the social program, so it doesn't matter if grants are big. Also, we can crossify the Levitt's card from case that when conceded, which specifically talks about how the plan just defunding the police does not make up enough money for social programs. However, the counterplan solves for this, with the affirmative plan doesn't. The counterplan makes up excess costs, which is the third plank. The third plank, this solvency deficit from the affirmative when conceded, we completely solve the entirety of the case. It doesn't matter if we lose out on any framing, we solve for the affirmative better than they do. On to the federalism dissent. The biggest argument to make here is this uniqueness push about how Trump has screwed over federalism. First of all, the Cassidy evidence in the 1AR specifically indicates that the state coronavirus measures are the state coronavirus response prove the states can act independently of Trump, and this completely outweighs because not only does it show the states that can act independently, but also their card is only about mail-in voting. Trump denying mail-in voting. However, Trump has attempted and failed on many different state reforms. The states don't take him seriously anymore. The card in the 1AR is about mail-in voting. This is just a threat he's been continuing on for at least a month. He's not managed to actually enforce anything over the states with it. However, the state COVID response proves the states can act independently, proves they are acting independently in the status quo, which gives us uniqueness on the dissent. What happened? And then, so this completely outweighs because one, COVID strengthening the state's federalism revives the policing power that's Cassidy. They weaken police powers which hampers effective state COVID response. That's the U-20, and they transfer quarantine authority to the federal government. This causes poor revival of the economy and economic downturn. That's the Hub 20 card. And economic downturn causes war and kills all life because of lack of interdependence and decreased cost of war. That's Tonison. They didn't contest the impact, so we get full weight. All we have to do is win a 1% risk of this dissad because the counterplan solves the case. On to case. They made one big concession here. They conceded our Wilderson concession from the 2NC. Wilderson's argument is that social death is an ontological thing that is tied to our world and it specifically cannot be solved for through trying to revise the system itself. His argument is that the system cannot be used to destroy the system. That means that the social death effect is ontological, and there's no reason that the ontological and it's inevitable. They don't solve. It doesn't matter if they're trying to make this argument where they're attempting to solve. Attempting to solve doesn't matter if the counterplan solves the entirety of the case. They have no impact because they conceded their impact is inevitable. It doesn't matter all the framing stuff. They conceded the util is best. The best consequentialism allows us to make the best policy decision.
Okay. Would you like a roadmap?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to be going to the counterplan, then topicality, then budgets, then federalism, then on case. So basically we went on the CP. The next says that the federalism law cannot have any power over the funding, but I said in my Botch 20 evidence, Only federal action can solve for policing, and federal law funding advocates for the state. It's also key to ensuring comprehensive guidelines for the follow-up on local levels. So basically, we're saying that federal law can have power over it because federal law makes the federal funding for each and every unit, such as military, education, and policing. Also, they said in their rebuttal that the CB can solve better for the case, yet obviously you said that our contentions were inevitable and cannot be solved, like black violence. So basically, you should disregard the entire CP case that he made, because how can he say that it can solve when he literally also said that it cannot solve? So he's contradicting himself. Next, the neg 1 and R and 2 and R drop T, meaning that we went on education, precision, and predictability, and our interpretation is right in the entire plan. Also, they drop budgets in the block. So that means we win on defunding police, gives options of funding for COVID and education. Also, they said something about economic decline, but I don't see how that can be a real argument, because economic decline has happened in recently COVID and also the Great Depression, and we have still brought ourselves back up on that. So economic decline shouldn't even be any impact or any factor in your judging. What else? He said something about how Trump is not really popular, so we can't really I don't know I forgot what he said, but he said something about Trump isn't popular, yet he still has power over all these federal systems. And you need to realize that he still has power over literally the entire government, so he still has a factor in this entire plan. Also, their Juan et al. 2020 evidence says the best way to protect the economy is through controlling coronavirus. I don't see how protecting the economy through coronavirus is actually a real case, because the economy has already been in a downfall already. So you can't really, if you're trying to protect it, then you should protect it with defunding the police, because that gives more money to the economy. But okay. Case. The 2NC says black violence is happening right now in Cross-Six. Which means if they can't understand that black violence is an ongoing problem and is collecting bodies by continuing to go into the way of nuclear war, then they do not understand their entire framing, because their framing is talking about how like they want to protect the most bodies, when nuclear war can take out the entire population and can stop the civilization from ever rising up again. So if they can't even simply understand that fact, then they have no case at all, and they do not understand their case one bit. The rebuttal said that I never said anything about our impacts being inevitable. I never said anything about nuclear war being inevitable. We did say that black bodies are continuously being oppressed in this country. So I do not understand where or wherever I said that was not inevitable. Let's see. Okay. Federalism. Federalism says non-unique the policies of Trump presidency means federalism is dead. Right, 2AC federalism DA frontline non-unique the policies of Trump presidency means federalism is dead. It is about the power of the base states policies, and redirectional is not independent. Basically, if their federalism DA means nothing, because they can't really have federalism if Trump is actually the president of the United States, because all he cares about is power and inevitably gaining more power. So they can't really have the entire federalism DA, and you should completely take that out of the running for this entire case. I still have like 26 seconds. So yeah, you should really vote AF, because we're better on, case, T, budgets, the CP, and federalism in every way possible. And the AF is just really basing it most on like, oh, we didn't do this and we didn't do that, but really we actually did. And they really dropped their most key evidence in their neg block, which really states that like, oh, and also like it really states in their, oh, okay, I'm good.